Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Next Level Pet people will do anything for their dogs. That means treating them with next level protection from parasites with NexGard Plus, afoxolaner, moxidectin, and parental chewable tablets. NexGard Plus chews provide one and done monthly protection against fleas, ticks, heartworm disease, roundworms, and hookworms, all in a tasty beef-flavored chew. Use with caution in dogs with a history of seizures or neurologic disorders. Dogs should be tested for existing heartworm infection prior to starting a preventive. Ask your vet about NexGard Plus chews.
If low energy, weight gain, or a drop in sex drive are holding you back, testosterone replacement therapy from Henry Meds may help you reclaim your edge. Their TRT treatments are backed by trusted providers who understand men's health. It's 100% online and discreet and includes free labs for a flat monthly fee. Start your journey towards strength and performance. Visit henrymeds.com/TRT to learn more and get $50 off today. Not all patients are eligible. Results may vary. Consult a healthcare provider to determine if treatment is right for you.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, a show that uncovers what's fact, what's fake, and what's fun in the crazy world of pseudoarchaeology. Hello and welcome to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 171. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and tonight, the peopling of the New World. When did people get here? How did people get here? And how do we date this stuff anyway? All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. It is nice to be here yet again for show number 171. Damn. I've been like, I'm working here. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I thought tonight I would talk a little bit about the peopling of the New World, because it's something that just tends to come up a lot sort of in my archaeology life. And it's just something that I find super interesting. I love talking about peopling of the New World. And it works here because some studies on peopling of the New World are very scientific. And other studies on peopling of the New World are highly pseudoscientific, super pseudoarchaeology, you know? And I do find it, the question of like, how and when did human beings first get to the New World, to be the single hardest question in all of archaeology. I totally vote it as the hardest one. And because the data is so... it's hard to string together. You have stuff that doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. It's not crazy. It just doesn't, it is not satisfying. I'll tell you that much. And I love, it's like the great mystery, you know, I love trying to figure it out. And again, the people who got here first, these are going to be the ancient ancestors of all modern Native American populations, right? So the first ancestors of theirs, when did they first get into North and South America? All right. So first, which way did they go, right? And there's like, oh, did they come by boat? Did they come from Europe? You know, the overwhelming consensus. And this is supported by genetic data. This is supported by the archaeology. It's supported backwards and forwards, is crossing the Bering Land Bridge, right? So these are Asian populations that are coming across from northeastern Asia, right? That northern part of Russia over there, and crossing into what is now Alaska. Now you have to realize at the time that the oceans were like 300 feet lower than they are today, right? That's a huge difference because the water's in the glaciers. So the oceans are way lower. And what that does is, in that area between Asia and Alaska that we call Beringia, that area is now land. And this is very important right off the bat. The area of Beringia is huge. It's not just some little like ice bridge that everyone has to crowd on and walk over the water or something. It's not like that. It is a huge area of land. It's like putting another Alaska up there. It's like you have Alaska, then you put another huge chunk of land the size of Alaska right next to it, and it connects to Asia. So it's like its own little mini country, Beringia. So that's how people got here. Now, as they cross Beringia, how do they then filter in to the New World? In the olden days, we used to be much more fans of what's called the ice-free corridor. You have these huge ice sheets. What are they? The Laurentian and the Cordilleran, something like that. I think I'm right. And there's a opening in between them, kind of sort of through the middle left side of Canada and filtering down into, kind of Wyoming, that general area. So the idea used to be, I don't know, 30 years ago, that people that's how they went, because there's so much ice sheets and general coldness going on. But as time has gone on, and especially in the last, I would say like 15 years, the idea of the kelp highway has much more, I would say it's a much better option, meaning that people just went from beach to beach, right? They just cruised along the beaches from Asia, around Alaska, what is now Alaska, Canada, and down, and just went all the way down to South America, beach by beach by beach. And you can do that fairly fast, right? I don't mean in 20 minutes. I don't mean in a year, but I do mean in like a couple hundred years. You know what I mean? That could go fast. I could see people just fishing from one beach to the next, and from eating like either sea mammals or shellfish, that kind of stuff. I mean, I like abalone as much as the next person. And so all you have to do is strip all the abalone off the rocks at the one beach and then go to the next beach. And it's like awesome. You got to barely do anything. How hard is it to strip abalones at like low tide when no human beings have ever been there before? I mean, dude, like that's the world's easiest food. And to me, that kind of thing provides just like a food bonanza. As long as you keep moving, you like denude each beach and then you keep going, right? It's a piece of cake. So I could see that happening pretty fast. That's me. That's where I go with this. So that's kind of the how, right? Across Beringia and down. Now, when did this happen? Oh, in the old days. And by the old days, I mean like the 1970s, really from, the 1930s and 40s up until the 70s or so. It was thought that Clovis was the earliest culture, right? And we've talked about this before. Clovis, the Clovis barrier, the Clovis mafia, all this kind of stuff. Basically, the idea was Clovis was the first culture, and that was from about 13,000 years ago. The idea was it was around 13,000 years ago when the earliest people crossed. And you can see evidence of that from like Clovis spear points and that kind of stuff. But people started finding pre-Clovis sites, right? Which I will say in like the 70s and 80s, there was a bit of bullying in the archaeology world. And when people found that, they were sort of poo-pooed. And it was like, no, that's not true. But enough of them were found. Evidence got better and ideas changed. That's how archaeology goes. You get more evidence. And so by the 90s, the idea of Clovis first was kind of old news. And even in the 80s, like people were like, I don't know. And we have sites that are older than 13,000 years. Now, these sites start to get tough to deal with, again. And I would say, before I talk about that, what really broke all this open was the site of Monteverde. It's in southern South America. It is near the beach. Goes with my kelp highway thing. And I believe they originally dated that to 13,500 or something like that. It's just before Clovis, right? It's a little bit before Clovis, but it counts. That's the one that everyone freaked out about. But ultimately, in the later 90s, just to like put a lid on it, they invited a bunch of archaeologists down there that looked at it and they're like, yes, indeed, this site is pre-Clovis. Okay. So then you would think, well, then the floodgates open. And the answer is they kind of did. And the much more difficult question is, what do we mean by pre-Clovis, right? And what we find is I think that there's plenty of sites that date to like 13,500, plenty of sites that date to 14,000, plenty of sites that date to like 14 and a half. By the time you get to around 15, 2 or something like that, woo, it gets slim, and that's what's fascinating, because it gets way tougher. Maybe you can eke out a 16 for me, 16,000 years old. Boy, those are rare. And they also quickly get a little shaky. And I'll explain what I mean by that later. One of the tough aspects of this, it's not the dating, which I'll talk about later. It's the artifacts themselves. Clovis is so easy. When you find a Clovis point, you're like, there it is, right? And there's Clovis culture and all that kind of good stuff. Here we are, mammoth hunters, whatever, right? But pre-Clovis it's not nearly so organized, friends. And they have tools, and it is a thing. Pre-Clovis is real. But it's harder to define easily. It seems to be, there's like more variety. It's almost like a language that's not standardized yet, if that makes sense. It's like this little pocket does it like this, and this little pocket does it like this. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it makes the archaeology more difficult. So if people ask me, oh, do you believe in pre-Clovis? Yes, of course. It's not about me believing. It's about, is there data? And there totally is. But how old can you go? And for me, boy, after about let's say 16,000 years ago, it's slim. And that's what I think I'll dive into after the break, after I finish this, after I kind of wrap this up. Just what are some examples of some of the oldest sites in the New World, right? And why do we think they're old, and how old do we think they are? And with that, I'll be right back. Oh no, I will. I mean, maybe. Okay, I'll be right back.
It's not rocket science. Grayscale has been educating investors on crypto for over a decade. Grayscale. Invest in your share of the future. Investing involves risk and possible loss of principal. Visit grayscale.com for more information.
Well, hello, and welcome back to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 171. And I've been discussing the peopling of the New World, which is a very archaeological and true thing to study until you have certain aspects of it that are totally silly. But as we talk about this, I think it's worth it to just take a moment and describe some of the sites that kind of break the Clovis barrier, some of the oldest sites. In no particular order. These are just ones that I know of or have talked a lot about or been in the general area of, this kind of stuff. The first one is Arlington Springs, Man, which is the oldest human remains in the New World, I believe. The oldest, like, well-dated human remains in the New World. This isn't a whole body, right? This is just the femurs. It's like kind of like the lower leg bones. It was found on Santa Rosa Island, right off the coast of Southern California. It was found in the 50s. It wasn't really dated until the earliest 2000s. And they were like, oh my God, I believe when I last heard, because I know some of the researchers who worked on this directly, they were dating it to 13,500 years ago. Now, that might be a tick off. They might have redated and gotten slightly different. It might be 13,001 or something like that. But 13,005, that's right on the far side of Clovis. That's kind of pre-Clovis-y. You know what I mean? It's right there. So that again is the oldest human. And it goes with the Kelp Highway thing that I like, because according to the Kelp Highway, where would you find the oldest human remains? You'd find them along the beaches of the west coast of North and South America, right? So that kind of makes sense. And there's an even older site in Oregon, but it's not a human being, but what it is, human poo. So I would much rather work on the California site than the Oregon poo site. But the Oregon human poo, I think, found in a cave dates to 14,000. I think it's 14,200 or something like that. So Oregon has beat us Californians by the better part of 1,000 years, but they did it with human excrement. So whatever, Oregon. But those sites are real. Those sites are well dated, right? I got no problem with those sites. But then let's go up north, right? Because you would think like where to find the oldest sites in the New World, where it would be like in Alaska, northern, like Yukon, right? That kind of thing. And people have looked. And we also have to think that the looking for this stuff is intrinsically difficult, right? I'd way rather work on California on the Channel Islands, chilling out, looking for a site rather than like braving the Yukon, you know? Bears are not your friend. One of the sites that we talk about when we talk about this really early stuff is Bluefish Cave. And it's funny, you guys, there's certain sites in archaeology, and this pertains to famous ones and kind of lesser ones. I mean, like Pompeii, you know, certain sites, I've noticed this over the years, they'll come into the news and then they'll just kind of leave for a while and nobody cares. And then they'll kind of come in, and for whatever reason, I'm telling you that Bluefish Cave, it's like in the last 2-ish years or so, it's been like the return of Bluefish Cave. And I do think I'm going to do like maybe a YouTube channel video or something specifically on Bluefish Cave. And why? Because I actually had to talk about Bluefish Cave for one of the TV shows that I was a part of. They asked a bunch about Bluefish Cave, and I find that the television producers and stuff, they kind of have their thumb on the pulse, right, of, you know, of culture and pop culture and that kind of stuff. And they were going to town about Bluefish Cave. I had to like learn a bunch about Bluefish Cave like the night before they were going to ask me. I'm like, oh my God, I better get on this. And I ended up doing a bit of a deep dive in Bluefish Cave. And here's the deal. Bluefish Cave is in like the northern Yukon. It's in northern Canada. It was originally found, or originally excavated, at least in the 1970s. And it's actually a series of little caves right in the same area. And it was excavated by this archaeologist. I think his name was Jacques St. Mars or something like that. So I know I'm very close with his name. And Jacques excavated this in the 70s, and it was basically like food remains. So this isn't like human remains. And I don't think even there may have been some tools found in there or not. Can't remember. But the big thing was like food remains. And the idea that you could tell that human beings were like cutting, like remains of the bones, right? And you could tell that there were cut marks on the bones that from ancient people, you know, making dinner, that kind of stuff. Makes sense. And to my memory, there was a deposit that was about 14,000 years old. And then there was one that was about 24,000 years old. And just the dating to 24,000 in the 1970s, nobody believed him. You know, this was like this Clovis stronghold time. But there's been this like story recently. The easy story to tell is like, oh, Jacques St. Mars was vindicated because the 24,000-year-old dates are real. Or are they? Now, what we're going to find with all of these sites I'm going to talk about is there's two main problems that you have to get over if you're dealing with really old sites in terms of peopling of the New World. Problem number one is the dates. You want to make sure that your dates are good. Problem number two is the artifacts, meaning are the artifacts actually ones that human beings touch or are related to human beings, right? And then you kind of have a third problem with the two together. Do the artifacts go with the dates you have, right? So that there's always, you got to make sure you cover all three of these bases, or 2.5 of these bases. You know what I mean? Like if you have something like Arlington Springs, man, you have human femurs. The artifact thing is done. You're like, I have real pieces of a person here. And then the dates are solid. So you're like, I'm good. Like nobody argues Arlington Springs. You know, if you get way down the rabbit hole, you can argue certain little bits and bobs about the dates. You know, ooh, is it 13-2 or 13-4? That kind of stuff. But it's minor, you know. with Bluefish Cave and with the rest of these sites I'm going to start to talk about, these two problems get difficult. So here's what I thought when I took a deep dive. And by deep dive, I mean, I looked really closely at a lot of the photos of the food remains. And these are just bones that are chewed up, right? Little flecks of bone. And I got to say this. I looked at the stuff that was 14,000 years old. When you look at the stuff that was 14,000 years old, the bone, the cut marks are immediately obvious. Like, I could show you in 10 minutes and you'd believe me. You're like, so I have no problem with the idea that human beings were in Bluefish Cave at 14,000 years ago preparing their dinner. Like, I'm good. The stuff from 24,000 years ago, I'm not the hugest fan, you guys. I've seen enough of this stuff. A lot of this stuff looked like rodent gnawing and that sort of thing. And when you're an archaeologist, you see a lot of this stuff, you start to just recognize it. Like some of the photos, I was like, oh yeah, that's been gnawed on by like gophers, or that kind of thing, or by rats or whatever. You can tell the difference. And so that's a problem. So with Bluefish Cave, I have no problem with the dates, if that makes sense. And you rarely do. That's a big thing about dealing with this stuff. The dates are almost always right. It's just, do they relate to the stuff? Again, carbon-14 is amazing. Carbon-14 is great. The chances of getting a bad sample or this kind of thing, it's not happening. Right? Again, there's little things that mess with it. There's very technical stuff that can mess with it a little bit. And you can test for that by dating slightly different materials and this kind of thing. But anyway, I got no problem with the Bluefish Cave dates. What I do have a problem with is that human beings were actually involved at all in the older stuff. Now, I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong. I could be like, oh, Kinkella, guess what? It's actually true. But see, it's just not clean, if that makes sense. I want a site with clean data if I want something really old. And Bluefish Cave don't do it. 14,000 does, 24,000 don't. Moving on. Another site that is classically talked of as sort of really old is Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. Now, Meadowcroft is is it in Pennsylvania? It's in that area of the United States, I believe. And Meadowcroft it has dates that date to like 16,000. Meadowcroft is tough because this is another one where they definitely have artifacts and stuff. It's the same story. Like human beings were definitely in there, but when? And this is also where like you might have a piece of charcoal that you're dating for carbon-14 dating, but it might not necessarily go with the actual stone artifacts precisely, right? So you can't date stone artifacts with carbon-14. Carbon-14 only works on stuff that was once alive. So Meadowcroft, I'm more prepared to accept the 16,000-year-old dates from Meadowcroft than the 24,000 from Bluefish Cave. But again, can't you hear it in my voice? I'm not happy, right? I don't have happiness because it's not clean, you guys. So, and this is nothing against any of the archaeologists who work in any of these sites. I get they got a really tough gig, man, and they're doing good research. But and Meadowcroft even goes later to like 19,000. It's possible. Again, Meadowcroft is not crazy, but I wish it was a bit better. Now, let's make it even tougher. Let's talk about White Sands. Oh, White Sands. Oh, I'm going there. White Sands has been in the news a lot. These are the footprints. These are the human footprints that are there with giant sloth footprints. And they have been dated, I believe, to 23,000. I could be off 1,000 years either way. I could have been 22, but it's right in there. That's old. See you guys? That blows my hypothesis out of the water because I think it's much more of like a 17 or 18,000, maybe 20, 22, 23. That's pretty old. Now, this is another one. You may have heard me say this before. I got no problem with the dates. And I do have to say the other archaeologists were really hardcore about their original dates. They're like, are you sure? And there's all these very specific aspects to the carbon-14 dating that could have dated the stuff falsely too old, little too old, and they, to their great credit, really controlled for that. Like their dates are good. Like they've tried hard. Good for them. So again, I got no problem with the 23,000. The one thing I have a problem with, and I might be in the minority here, I might end up looking a fool in this, but I'm going to go there, friends, because that's why you tune in. You tune in for me going there. I'm not sure the footprints are human footprints. Now, White Sands does kick ass, and I could be very wrong, and that's fine. I would owe the dudes at White Sands a beer, right, if I'm wrong about this, but there's obviously giant sloth footprints that are there, right? We're all good. Giant sloths did roam White Sands at 23,000 years ago. This is White Sands, New Mexico, by the way, just so you know. And we're just out in the heat. But the littler prints, I'm kind of like, are those baby giant sloths? I don't know. When you see the images of the footprints, they look pretty human-y. I gotta say, but they're also, I don't know, man, they could be up to interpretation a little bit. And some of the images I haven't seen, to their credit, I haven't seen great images of this. So I want to tell you, I haven't seen like close-ups and all that kind of good stuff. I saw better images for Bluefish Cave, but some of them appeared like the footprints appeared to not have the right number of toes. And that could have just been the drawing or whatever, but I was like, the 4 toes don't got enough toes. But is this a case of researchers seeing what they want to see? I don't know. Again, these are great professional people. That is my only sticking point with White Sands. Barring that, of all the like really oldest, I should say, archaeology sites in the New World, of any that could break that sort of 20,000 year barrier and be a bit older, currently White Sands is the best. It's the most possible one. But for me, the story is not finished yet on that one. When we return, we got to talk about the crazy ones. Well, hello and welcome back one final time to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 171. We are peopling the New World. And we were just talking about some of the better sites, better older sites, but some of the problems with them. Once you get a bit past about 15,000 years old, even maybe 16, it gets real dark and dim, my friends, and a really tough call. I do want to point out that genetic studies have been done. A summary of that, meant for normal human audiences, was written up by Jennifer Raff. It's a book called Origin. And she does a really great job of sort of putting a lot of crazy data together to make a story. And for her, the genetics also point to human beings first getting into the New World around 20,000 years ago or so, give or take. I believe it's like 18 to 25 or something like that. And so that sounds pretty good. I think that's pretty reasonable. We have to remember that these archaeological sites, it's not like we're going to find the first footprint of the first guy to ever come into the New World. So when we find an old site, we want to add on a little bit of time, right? So for me, like pinned to the wall, if you're like, hey, Andrew, when do you think human beings first got here? I used to always say about 17,000 years ago. I'm a big fan for about 17,000 years because I figure you see stuff 15's into 16,000 years old, and then it gets so dim. I'm like, add another 1,000 years for sites we haven't found yet. A lot of them are covered by the ocean because 300 feet of sea level rise, right? So I tend to go somewhere in there. And if it ends up being 20, I think that's still totally reasonable, But of course, there's also crazy sites and crazy guesses that are really just not they don't go with too much reality. So, some of these, there's a site called the Topper site where they have like 50,000 dates that date to like 50,000 years ago. I'm like, come on, man. And their data is just not that great. Again, I bet the dates are fine. They're just not dating stuff where human beings were. Yeah, it's 50,000 years old, but there ain't no people yet. And then, of course, I've done a podcast already on the Cerruti Mastodon site, which is 130,000 years old. That one's really lame. And that even has some real archaeologists working on it, but their data is like not good at all. And some of their guesses as to what happened 130,000 years ago, like they were saying that because of the fact that the rocks that they found there that they're calling stone tools, their deal is like there is a mastodon there, and the remains of a mastodon, and it does date to 130,000 years. Again, it's another time where the dates are fine. They almost always are. It's were there people there? And they're saying, even though they found no like human remains, they're like, oh, these rocks are ancient tools, but they're not. They're like so basic that tools from that time would be much nicer, much finer. And these are just crappy, and they're not tools, you guys. But they're arguing that they are. And then when they get pushback from archaeologists like me, they say their answer was, oh, well, they were made by an earlier form of human being that hasn't been found yet. Oh, Lord, dude, that's like silly. And of course, when you get people saying that Topper's 50,000 and Cerruti's 130, people like Graham Hancock glom onto that. In Graham Hancock's last YouTube video, he talks about how, Topper and Cerruti, and he lists these, oh, they're so old, and archaeologists, what do we know? Of course. And it's like, yeah, okay. So those are like really, those are really not serious, and not really worth our time. Again, if it was proven tomorrow that Cerruti was actually a human caused like mastodon kill site, I would be totally into it. I would think that is so cool, and that like it would be so great to like rewrite the history books. That's what pseudoarchaeologists don't understand. One of the many things, well, they understand, they just lie. It's because archaeologists like this kind of stuff. I'm rooting for Cerruti. I should make the t-shirt, rooting for Cerruti. Seriously. Like, that would be the coolest thing, but it just looks bad. We have to remind ourselves, we have to be honest. We have to come back to the dates and the artifacts. It's like, what do you have? You have to, it's like having a murder case, and you have to prove that your defendant is innocent. Can you do that? Or I guess it's much more correct to say, prove that he's attempting to prove he's guilty. But does your evidence support that? There's other ones, other like sites that are stupid, like the Calico Early Man site. That's here in California, out in the desert. It's a bunch of broken rocks that rolled down a hill. But it got some traction because Louis Leakey of famous Olduvai Gorge fame. Louis Leakey died in 1972, but right before he died, I want to say this literally happened in 1971 or something like that. He visited the Calico Early Man site and said it looked like, Homo habilis or something like that, tools. And it's like, Louis, shit. I even think his wife, Mary at the time was like, Louis, don't do this Calico Early Man thing. This is going to look real bad. But he did it, and sort of added support to it, but they're not. That's obviously like foolish. It's like, yeah, they rolled down a hill. They broke. And one of the great things about archaeology is when you look close, you can tell the difference between rocks that roll down a hill and rocks that are actually broken to make stone tools by human beings. And I do have to say, in all of this, we have to hold back on the natural human need to see patterns and to call something, if that makes sense. It's much easier to give in at sites like this and sort of start seeing things. I don't blame people when they do this. I do blame them long term, but I don't blame them short term. Like, this has happened to me before. Like, you're working at a site for months and you're finding nothing. you start to kind of think like you've found something. You start to see stuff in the clouds. You know what I mean? But that's the bummer, because those rocks are just rocks. And you've got to have good evidence, right? You have to go back to like, is there good evidence here? There's an old quote in archaeology that I love, which is, when in doubt, it's nothing. And it's so true. I have seen people screw this up. I understand. I've seen them almost go through. It's like the reverse of the 5 stages of grief. It's like the 5 stages of faking yourself out, you know, where they get to the point where they seriously believe they've found something. These are knowledgeable people too. These are not just like people off the street. These are like knowledgeable archaeologists. I've seen them go, you know, fall into the matrix and never heard from again. Like they start to believe weird stuff. And that's when it's time for you to get off the line for a little while, you know, and let someone else do the fighting. I don't mean for the rest of your career. I just mean for, hey, take a week or two, you know, look at something else, do something else. You're way too far in. I've seen this. And so I think that's might be what's happening at some of these sites. I think that the people are honest, that they honestly think they found a thing, but they haven't. Some of these people are, you know, somebody like Graham Hancock's a charlatan. He knows better. But some of these other people have like faked their own brain out. So in the end, what do I want? What do I think and what do I want? I think that people came into the new world at first as what we call fisher folk, meaning people who were adapted to coastal living, eating fish, eating shellfish, hunting sea mammals, that kind of stuff, that sort of that coastal lifeway. I think they spread rapidly down the coast because, wouldn't you, when it literally is kind of that Garden of Eden thing where certain animals have no natural predators until you show up. That's pretty good. So they blast down the coast. I think that happens. I think they first cross. I'm going to go pretty light, like 18,000 years ago. I used to say 17, but with the genetic data, I'll push it. I'll give you an 18. I would obviously change that tomorrow if like the White Sands site comes in really good and they're looking better rather than worse. And then I think that from the coast that the earliest human ancestors went into the interior. Oh, and just so you guys just do remember, these are all modern humans. We're not talking about Neanderthals or Homo erectus or any of that crap. We're right. This has nothing to do with evolution, right? It's so soon. This isn't millions of years. We're talking just thousands. So these are all modern human people. I think it is possible that they came in through something like an ice-free corridor or something as well, or even maybe did something funky, like went all the way across the top of North America, the sort of Inuit, way, and then down the East Coast or something like that. That could happen. Coastal, sort of what we would almost call the wrong way. I could see anything like that, but I could see a fast movement, and that's where I'm at, right? So 18,000 years ago, Kelp Highway. That's what I vote. What would cause me to change my mind? I want good evidence. I want good data. And I have to say, basically all archaeological evidence in the New World that's older than about 15,500 years ago, maybe 16, anything older than that, I haven't seen anything good. And by good, I mean, I want any fool to look at it and go, yep, people did that. I want any trained archaeologist to look at it and go, oh, yeah. No hemming and hawing. No, like, well, it could be. No, we need something good, right? Extraordinary claims, extraordinary evidence kind of thing. And I do hope for the best. I would love a 40,000-year-old one. Like that would be awesome. But I just don't see it. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Pseudoarchaeology podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you like and subscribe. And if you have questions for me, Dr. Andrew Kinkella. Feel free to reach out using the links below or go to my YouTube channel, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology. See you guys next time.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.